So with all the talk of ASUS BIOSes and AMD processors and everything, I decided to pick up an ASUS ROG Ally powered by the AMD Z1 Extreme. Today we're going to take a look at it, give you my thoughts on it, how it compares to the Steam Deck, and pretty much what life is like with the dope handheld gaming PC. But first, you gotta pay some bills.
The all-new iCUE Link ecosystem for Corsair finally removes all the cable clutter from your PC. iCUE Link components synchronize RGB lighting and settings between connected devices with a single wire, creating a chain of devices on a single port via the Link Hub. Take control of your system and ditch the clutter by following the sponsored link in the description below.
Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that this is not sponsored in any way by ASUS. I bought this Ally myself, and all of my experiences and opinions are my own after owning it for a couple of months. So I've had the Ally for about 2 months, and ASUS's quality control already bit me right when I got it, actually, because the first Ally that I had, yes, this is the second one, the first Ally that I had was straight up blue screening, so I figured it was just that bad of a silicon lottery loser. So I did go through the return process. One of the first positives that I want to talk about the Ally, at least if you live in the US, where I do, is the fact that Best Buy is the retailer for it. So that return process was actually pretty much, I mean, it would have been done same day if they had some in stock still, but I had to wait a couple days for them to ship me one once they got it in stock. But return process was painless just because Best Buy handles it. Literally just walked in, told them what was going on, and then got the replacement shipment set up and everything. But the elephant in the room, obviously, is the Steam Deck. How does the Ally compare to the Steam Deck? I'll just give you my wrap up at first, and then we'll go into more detail. So I think the biggest difference between the Ally and the Steam Deck is that the Steam Deck is a handheld console first that happens to play PC games via Proton, and the Ally is a gaming PC that happens to be in a handheld. And so it presents an interesting set of trade-offs and differences in the experience, the user experience, and also the setup experience, really, because Windows sucks to set up when this is your entire mouse. Since SteamOS is obviously built for the Steam Deck, the entire setup process can be done via controller, whereas the Ally's controller isn't enabled until Armory Crate is up and running. So basically after the entire normal Windows setup process. So you're basically stuck with using the touchscreen, which, you know, it works, it's okay, but if you ever run into any problems and you have to actually do stuff that requires precision with the cursor, you're screwed. You have to get a USB hub and plug in a mouse or something. So setup is just, it's a Windows PC with all the quirks and annoyances and all that sort of stuff versus Steam Deck, where they really made that process and the onboarding feel a lot more game console-like, where it's just you sign in your Steam account, it uses a keyboard with the trackpads and everything, so you don't even need to rely on the touchscreen accuracy. Whereas this thing is, you know, it's just a PC. So you gotta set up Windows, you gotta deal with the Microsoft account thingy. Then once you're in Windows, then you have to do the 50 billion system updates that it has. The other main difference between the Ally and the Deck is that the Deck's system architecture seems like it's a lot more focused on efficiency. The Deck's APU is happy at around the 10 to 15 watt range, whereas the Ally doesn't really start to actually show its performance until 18-ish watts. And so it's a different trade-off. The Ally is faster, but it also consumes more power, whereas the Deck is not as fast, but you get longer battery life out of it. And I'll talk about why, even watt for watt, it's not as clear cut as you would think of a decision whether you're gonna go with the Ally or a Deck. The one thing that the Deck and the Ally do have in common, though, is a 40 watt hour battery, which I thought was kind of interesting. I feel like the Ally could have used a little bit bigger of a battery. I'll talk about that later. It has to do with just the sheer power of this APU in here. I think ASUS's reasoning was, let's keep the weight down, because this is 50 grams lighter than a Steam Deck, which surprised me in that I really didn't think 50 grams was going to be noticeable, but it is actually noticeable when you're holding it and playing on it for a long time. While the Steam Deck can go anywhere from 6 to 15 watts, which 6 watts is still insane to me. The Steam Deck is still an efficiency king. The Ally can go from 10 to 30, and I believe if it's plugged in, it boosts up to 53 watts. So with those differences, what do you get in exchange for a battery that's the same size and a screen that's roughly the same size? Well, the first thing you're gonna notice is this screen is probably one of my favorite displays in like any of the devices that I own, because it's a 7-inch 1080p 120 hertz IPS with FreeSync. And oh my God, FreeSync is VRR is one of those things where I feel like just like high refresh rate or HDR, once you experience it and understand what variable refresh rate does and the smoothness it gives to you as far as frame delivery, it's really hard to go back. And the Steam Deck's display, while it was neat that you could fine tune the refresh rate anywhere from 40 to 60, and with some tweaks 30 to 70 hertz, you were still bound by VSync and having to actually make that frame time and hit your intended refresh rate. Whereas this thing, you can basically just set the settings to whatever you want, and because it has variable refresh rate, you're getting the frames immediately as soon as they're drawn by the GPU. It's just a perfectly smooth experience with no tearing. I think that's one of the strongest arguments for the Ally is just this display is freaking awesome. The VRR range is 48 to 120 hertz, and it does have low frame rate compensation, so technically it should be able to go down all the way to 24. But people in the ROG Ally subreddit have actually just said you can use custom resolution utility to alter the FreeSync range. So mine is running from 30 to 120 hertz. With a 30 to 120 hertz VRR range, it's been a blast with this display. Like anything except for the game actually stuttering, like Dead Space. If the game itself isn't stuttering, then the display is not gonna stutter, and it's one of the best displays I've used. It's surprisingly bright outdoors, and the anti-glare is noticeably better than at least the Steam Deck's glossy display. I haven't actually used the Steam Deck matte display on the 512. Okay, so what are the differences between the Z1 Extreme versus the Deck's codename Aerith, which I still think is one of the coolest code names for any tech thing ever. The Z1 Extreme versus the Aerith. Zen 4 on the CPU side versus Zen 2 on the Steam Deck, which is a huge upgrade. More on that a little bit later because I think it's a little overspec'd because of the fact that it's now 8 cores versus 4 cores. So obviously on the CPU side, this thing absolutely runs circles around the Steam Deck. Moving on to the GPU side, this is RDNA 3 as opposed to RDNA 2, and it has 50% more compute units. It's got 12 instead of 8. Which is a hilarious number when you're used to talking about these gigantic desktop GPUs. But yeah, it has 50% more GPU per GPU than the Steam Deck. There is a speed bump on the RAM. Unfortunately, and I really think this thing could have used 32 gigs of RAM, it only has 16 gigs of RAM, same with the Steam Deck. Moving on from the APU, because we're gonna be obviously deep diving into those performance numbers later. The speakers are surprisingly decent. Like they get loud and they have a fair amount of mid bass, which really, I honestly didn't have a problem with the Steam Deck speakers, but this thing legit feels like an upgrade. Plus the Ally comes with a license for the Dolby Atmos virtual surround sound system that is built into Windows. And so all the games that you play on here will take advantage of that, and you'll get virtualized surround sound with the sounds coming from the correct direction and appropriate positioning and everything of the sounds, and it's freaking awesome. Another advantage that the Ally has over the Deck is that this thing will fast charge from dead, completely 0% dead to 50% in 30 minutes if you leave it off. Obviously if you use it, like it's gonna, have to split that power between your game and the battery, but it'll charge to 75% in 45 minutes. Another advantage that it has over the Deck is the dual fan cooling solution versus the Deck single fan. Now, yes, it can make more noise than the Deck single fan, but on average, it makes less noise just because it has 2 fans. So those 2 fans can spin at a lower RPM than the Deck single fan to get the same amount of cooling out of it. And then the miscellaneous other things, obviously the RGB joysticks, the fact that the power button is a fingerprint sensor, which is dope because if you do choose to log in with your Microsoft account, which I did, you get access to Windows Hello unlocking and that sort of stuff. And a neat trick that I've seen this fingerprint sensor do, and I don't know if this is just a Windows laptop thing. I mean, I haven't had a Windows laptop in forever. It stores your fingerprint when you power it on. So when you hold the button to power it on and then you get the vibration and it starts booting, you can let go of the power button, and that fingerprint that it read on power on is held until Windows boots up, and then when Windows requests for it, it sends it to Windows and then it unlocks. So the end result is with a single press of the power button when it's off, it'll boot all the way and log you in without you having to do anything else.
Be Quiet is proud to announce their all-new white Lightwings high-performance ARGB fans available in 120 and 140mm sizes. All fans are PWM and available in either a 7-blade or a 9-blade high-performance model. Lightwing's fans feature ARGB lighting on both the front and the back, allowing for a customized appearance no matter which way the fan is facing. Available in either a single fan or a triple pack with a fan hub included, the new white Lightwings fans from Be Quiet are an obvious choice for PC enthusiasts who demand performance and silent operation. To see the full list of specs and availability, follow the link in the description below.
So let's move on to what everyone probably wants to know. What is it like to actually play games on the ROG Ally? Looking at our synthetics in the 15-watt performance setting, it scored 75% higher overall in TimeSpy with a 72% higher graphics score and 115% higher CPU score than the Steam Deck at those same 15 watts. Firestrike was similar, almost exactly the same as the TimeSpy score. And in Port Royal, which yes, obviously that's not really that sensible of a test for any of these devices, but it's fun to see a tiny little APU at 15 watts pushing ray tracing. So in Port Royal, it was 78% higher than the Steam Deck score. So this is where we see the architectural advancements that AMD has made since Zen 2 and RDNA 2. Lots of fancy impressive numbers with that same 15 watt power budget, but does it translate to games? Because this was just synthetics. For our game selection, I went with 3 titles that all had track benchmarks, so that way I'd be able to compare it against the deck in a very consistent-ish way. All the benchmarks are run at 720p with FSR balanced on. That might seem odd for the 1080p display, but it's because, obviously, since the Steam Deck only has a 720p display, technically 800p because it's 16:10, because the Steam Deck is still down in the 720p range, I wanted to run the Ally at the same exact resolution as well, just so that we could compare watt for watt how each APU does. In Forza Horizon 5, the Ally scored 24% more FPS than the deck at 15 watts. Pretty impressive efficiency there. Cyberpunk was a weird case. The Ally actually scored within margin of error alongside the Steam Deck, so I believe the bottleneck must be somewhere else in that game. This hints at one of the negatives of this APU. At 15 watts, it's not, like, it'll do it, but it kind of grumbles about it, you know, stutters every once in a while when something hits the power budget too hard, and then it has to hard throttle some component, usually the CPU or the GPU. It's really much happier closer to 20 watts. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was 41% higher at the same 15 watts, 48 FPS versus 34. And that was at 720p highest with no scalers enabled, actually, because Shadow of the Tomb Raider doesn't have FSR. So it's an impressive showing from the Z1 Extreme, but the catch is that we're not on a 720p display. We're on a 1080p display. As far as the more modern AAA titles, like the heavier games to run, I think it might be a bit optimistic to expect playable frame rates, especially at native resolution. You're probably going to have to run FSR performance at the very least, if not ultra performance. Now I will say, because 1080p is a pretty big jump actually up from 720p in the amount of pixels, FSR ultra performance at 1080p looks about the same as FSR performance at 720p. I've been comfortable with something, say, Jedi Survivor on FSR performance and sometimes ultra performance. It's obvious that your game is being reconstructed and it's not rendering at native resolution, but because the display is only 7 inches, which is not that much bigger than a phone, it looks surprisingly passable. And so I actually don't mind playing games at that lowest scaling a lot of times. I believe, actually, yeah, in Everspace 2, I'm running it at ultra performance the whole time, and it's freaking awesome. I'm getting like anywhere between 40 to 70 FPS, and since it's VRR, I get all of those frames directly to my face. Like I mentioned earlier, I can't overstate how awesome it is to have VRR on a display like this, because it's on a device in which the APU's performance is constrained because of the fact that you have to be able to do this with it and pick it up and go and you know what I mean? And it has its own battery and everything. I think it's a perfect use case for variable refresh rate technology. While I don't really think the 1080p resolution is necessary, I think they could have still gotten away with a 720p display if it was still variable refresh rate and everything. It is a little nice to have, especially in games that, you know, are a lot lighter to run. And so yeah, the resolution I would say is not a necessity, but it is nice to have on this thing. At $50 more than a top of the line Steam Deck with the same exact storage, it's a pretty dope set of features and display upgrades and GPU upgrades and CPU upgrades that you get for those $50. So what this all tells us is that the Z1 Extreme in here, honestly, AMD, it's a surprisingly performant APU that can tackle games that you wouldn't really think of even trying. It blows my mind that not only is it even, like, is our RT even possible on something that you would hold in your hands, the fact that it's playable is nuts. These university students did a port of Descent from 1995, but they replaced the renderer with a fully path-traced RT renderer. And yeah, Descent ray traced plays a good 30 to 40 FPS, sometimes dipping down to the 25s, but honestly, 25 FPS was probably what I got on my freaking 486 anyway when I was playing Descent, and so it feels appropriate. It's just, it looks beautiful on here. All that dope performance to push that 120 Hz 1080p display comes at a cost though, and that cost is power. You can't beat the laws of physics, and unfortunately, ASUS did decide to keep this battery, like I said earlier, at 40 watt hours. You can burn through that battery real quick with the extra power that this thing has. So while the Steam Deck kind of takes care of the 6 to 15 watt range, and it's most happy at about 10 watts, 10 to 15 watts, the Ally starts at 10 watts. I believe the lowest you can actually set the TDP is 9, but you actually have to disable the Dolby Atmos stuff because the CPU doesn't have enough power to process the Dolby Atmos, and so the sound starts crackling, which, by the way, if you have an Ally and you're trying to run it on silent mode and you're wondering why your audio is crackling, disable Dolby in the Dolby app because it's just too much processing power for the thing to do in real time at 9 watts or 10 watts or whatever. The deck is good up until 15 watts, whereas this thing really starts getting going at about 18 watts. It's kind of like a scale in that if you want more performance and you're willing to give away that battery life, then go with the Ally. But if you want a little bit more battery life and the rest of the features of the Ally don't really appeal to you or matter to you, and you want a device that's significantly cheaper and more appropriate for the games that you're going to be playing on it, then the Steam Deck excels at that. That being said, Armory Crate SE on the ROG Ally does allow you to customize your power profiles. A little bit more about Armory Crate SE. I said on the RTFM show that Armory Crate SE must have been developed by a completely different set of developers because it actually works well. It glitches every once in a while, but nowhere near the inconsistency or just the jankiness that Armory Crate for like the regular desktop PCs acts. Some of the usual Armory Crate annoyances are there. I've had the lighting service for the Aura functions on the RGB joysticks. I've had that hold up sleep to the point where it killed the entire battery in my bag and it was just running super hot because it didn't go to sleep because lightingservice.exe was doing stuff for some reason. Armory Crate SE is perfectly serviceable. Like, it's fine, it launches my games, it allows you to customize the control schemes per game and blah, 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 blah. So all this ties back to what I said in the beginning. The Ally is an awesome, surprisingly powerful handheld gaming PC. And that's exactly what it is. It's a handheld gaming PC. You gotta be at least a little bit of a gaming PC nerd to kind of, or willing to teach yourself with it, which honestly I think is a pretty good device to get yourself into learning how different settings affect your performance and that sort of stuff. But if you just want a more game console, Nintendo Switch type experience, I would still highly recommend the Steam Deck, just because the fact that you're on a custom designed operating system that's designed to give you that console experience while still retaining PC game compatibility is always going to be a better experience, especially on the sort of like weird form factor devices like a handheld versus Windows on the handheld. It's a generic operating system that's been put onto a device that requires a little bit more weird considerations for its quirks versus something like SteamOS. So again, handheld gaming PC versus a Switch that happens to play PC games, which is basically what the Steam Deck is. If you're already looking at a 512 gigabyte Steam Deck, which is $650, and this thing is $700, and 1080p, more performance, better speakers, RGB, which is a selling point for some people, and a little bit lighter of a package with a fingerprint reader. If all of those things, or any of those things, are starting to be a little interesting to you, you might actually have a decision to make between the Steam Deck and the Ally. Because for only $50 more, you're getting all of that, and you don't have to murder your battery in 1 hour. You can still run this at a lower TDP. This doesn't necessarily limit you to always going YOLO full tilt, send it DGAF, but you can, and that's the cool thing to me. But it also does let you sort of get a little bit of that Steam Deck type efficiency out of it if you want to tweak some settings, lower that TDP, and kind of find the sweet spot for each game. If you want something that's more like a handheld PC that you can take with you and play all your PC games and do PC nerd stuff on it, the Ally is great. But if you're looking for a portable game console that happens to play PC games, get a Steam Deck. Yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. What do you guys think of the Ally? I mean, 700 bucks seems a little steep until you look at the $650 Steam Deck with the same storage and the same size display, but lower resolution and stuff. And it's like, oh, it starts to look like a better deal. Obviously, you can get a lot more performance out of not that much larger of a package by moving up to a gaming laptop, but you can't really play a gaming laptop anywhere, can you?
Phil, come back. Phil, come back.
So yeah, sound off in the comments down below, guys. What do you guys think of the ROG Ally? Because I freaking love this thing. I do kind of miss my Steam Deck a little bit, but it's moved on to a better life, and it's playing Destiny 2 24/7 now in Mark Dizzle's hands. And actually, funny story, his air conditioner went out. So he actually had a genuine reason to use the Steam Deck because he was like, it is way too hot right now in this 100-degree weather to run the gaming PC. And so 15 watts is a lot less of heat output into your room than, what is it, 500, 600 watts? So there you go. There's a use case for these handheld PCs if your air conditioner goes out. All right, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.